choices. If you are out of high school, and we'll have a class here in the auditorium, there'll be a ladies' class downstairs in the fellowship hall, and there will be a men's class actually for the teenage boys, all the way, the high school guys, and the men's class will be in the back corner back there. The high school girls will be in the girls' classroom with Miss Amanda tonight. So, and then, of course, our younger ones have their classes. I'm looking forward to teaching the 4th, 5th, and 6th graders this quarter. I don't know if the 4th, 5th, and 6th graders feel that way, but I'm excited about it. So that's going to start back here in just a little bit as well. If you want to take a Bible and open up to Matthew chapter 7, we're going to take a devotional thought from Matthew chapter 7 here in just a moment. That will be after John leads us in a song together, and the invitation song as well. And he just told me the song, it starts with the 7, but I don't remember the other two numbers. 764. If you want to take a songbook, open up to 764. We'll sing that first. Offer an invitation thought from Matthew chapter 7. Then have some announcements before we go to our Bible classes. As we begin tonight, let's start with a word of prayer together. Would you bow with me? Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for the opportunities that you brought to us in it. We thank you for the rain that's fallen, and we thank you for the sun that was shining. We know that we need both, and we ask you to help us to trust you when the rain falls and when the sun shines, and to always seek to do your will. Help us to be the kind of people that you want us to be that city set on a hill, so that we can shine like stars in the night sky. Forgive us when we fall, and give us the strength to stand and to try again. We offer this prayer to you in the name of Jesus. Amen. John?
As Adam announced here, 764, let's sing before the lesson, or the devotional tonight, please. 764. And if you would mark, let's sing tonight afterwards, number 911. 911, Bring Christ Your Broken Life. In conjunction with the other classes that Adam announced, if you are visiting our younger grades, 2s and 3-year-olds are downstairs. And then in a separate class are the 4 or 5, and if there's anybody specifically in kindergarten, that class is also downstairs. Then the 1st through 3rd is up here in the back classroom, and the 4th through 6th will be right through these doors as well. So if you need any help, if you're visiting, if you want to find myself or find someone, we can help you get to those particular rooms. But let's sing Teach Me, Lord, to Wait before the devotional 764.
Teach me, Lord, to wait right down on my knees, till in your own good time you answer my plea. Teach me not to rely on what others do, but to wait in prayer
Jesus ends the Sermon on the Mount in a way that's familiar to us. We've heard it before. I heard kind of a different presentation about it a couple of nights ago, last week. Keith Stanglin is a new professor at Heritage Christian University, and he's done a lot of study about different things, and he was giving a lecture. It was on Calvinism versus Arminianism. So that was, I know you're excited about the thought process behind that. But at the end of that lesson, he got into talking about Matthew chapter 7. Verse 12, so whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets. We call that the golden rule. Do unto others what you would have them do to you. And then we remember verse 13. Enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide, the way is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter by it are many. For the gate is narrow, and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few. And he made this illustration, and it fit perfectly with what I've always thought. If you picture in your mind what those verses are saying, you probably picture the same kind of thing that I have always pictured in my mind, and that Keith Stanglin talked about. There's this kind of like Robert Frost, two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and I took the one less traveled by, right? That's kind of the picture. There's this big, wide road, and it's kind of sloping down into this, kind of pit area, and there's a whole bunch of people that are on that path, on that road. And then kind of off to the side, right, we have this little vision. In my mind, I have this little bitty offshoot, this little bitty trail that cuts away from the main road, and it cuts up this mountain, and it's a lot more arduous, and it's a lot more difficult, and there's just a couple of people that are on it. Is that kind of the way you've looked at Matthew chapter 7, verses 13 and 14 before? I mean, that's kind of the way that I've pictured it. He said there's nothing wrong with that, but there's another way maybe to look at this, and it kind of reminds us of another great theme that we learn in our life. The fact of the matter is, it's actually the same road. One way to think about it is we are all on the exact same road. And the road is on a slope. It does kind of travel in two directions, and one of them is downhill. And there's a huge throng, a huge crowd of people that are meandering down this hill, down this road, and it does go to a bad end. But then there are a few people who have turned around. And have you ever tried to swim upstream? Have you ever tried to go against the flow? We have those phrases that talk about that. Have you ever been in such a crowded place and everybody else is going out and you're trying to get in, or vice versa? How difficult it is. Everybody else is having an easy time. Everybody else is having a simple task of just flowing along with everybody else. But anybody who tries to go against that flow, anybody who tries to go against that current, it's going to be difficult. And it's going to be narrow. And they're going to have to fight. And few people are going to want to do that. But we're all on the same road. And some people who are trying to go the right way and who are climbing uphill and who are fighting against the current and against what the world is saying to do and the direction the rest of the world is saying to go, maybe they trip. Maybe they stumble. Maybe they struggle. Maybe they can't make very fast progress. And a lot of times we want to judge people when they fall down. Or we want to say, how can you tell the difference between somebody who's on the broad pathway and someone who's on the narrow path? Who's gone through the easy road and who's going through the hard way? And maybe the difference is not that they're on two separate roads, but it's just a matter of which way are you facing. And even when we stumble, even when we fall, even if we slip backwards, what matters is if we're still facing the right direction. And so this week, that's what I want to encourage you to do. When you go back to work tomorrow, when you go back to school tomorrow, when you encounter your family or your friends or whatever it is that's going on, Make sure you're facing the right way. Face Christ and follow Him. And the crowds will be pressing against you and trying to get you to turn and go the other direction. But don't give in. Don't turn around. Because narrow is the way and difficult is the road, but it leads to life. And tonight, if you need to be on that road that leads to life, we've made this opportunity for you to ask for help, to ask for encouragement, or to ask for information. If you need to study, if you need to pray, if you need prayers said for you, whatever the need is that you have tonight, to make sure that you're facing the right way in your life, would you come forward right now while we stand and while we sing?
Good to see everyone tonight. Look forward to this new quarter and new classes beginning. I hope you've picked up an opportunity worksheet. Also hope you will pick up a September calendar, also a September assignments calendar. So get all those. Also, if you'll be picking up a flyer for the Legacy Sunday and Grandparents' Day on September the 12th. And that day we will also be handing out books to all of our don't want to say children because a lot of them is not children. All of them from birth up to 12th grade. So I hope that you'll be here and take part in that. We want to congratulate Shelley Hubbard on the birth of a new granddaughter born this afternoon to Vanessa and Mark Legg. Her name is Davy Mae Legg, 7 pounds, 14 ounces, 20.5 inches long. Be sure and send Shelley note, and also if you've got Vanessa's number, send them a congratulatory note. I know they would appreciate that. Sisters in Stitches meets tomorrow night. Appreciate all those that participated in Isaiah's call this afternoon. Jim said that he signed us up again for October the 6th. That'll be the first Wednesday night in October, so we'll have more to say about that. And also, if you'll be bringing peanut butter, there's going to be a peanut butter drive for Isaiah's call. So if you can help in that, please do that. Continue to remember the Martha Beasley family, Jacqueline and her family, and Larry, and all the family at this time. Her service was this afternoon, but please do remember them. And also to Miles and Tina Sledge over the passing of Tina's brother last Wednesday, and his service was held yesterday in Memphis. So please do remember them. We do have a lengthy list of those that are sick, and I know each one of you in here have someone close to you that's sick. Please remember all of these that we have. Send them a card, send them a text, let them know that you care, let them know that you love them. And let's do what we can for each of these. A couple of things for the teens. Dinner and a movie is going to be September the 12th. That's for teens and their parents after the evening services. Also, Exposure Youth Camp's coming up. And there's 2 sign-ups for the dinner and a movie and also for the Exposure Youth Camp on Doug's door. Anyone have any other announcements before we're dismissed to go to class? Nothing else? Let's be dismissed at this time.
I don't bite, so if you have trouble hearing, move on down. One of those numbers, it's scattered out. Trying to figure out today how long it's been since I taught a regular class. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I finished up in February of 20. So it's been a day or two. And, but anyway, selected to teach the auditorium on Wednesday nights for this quarter. And I chose to look at something that will probably be just a plain review for just about everybody. I decided to talk about David from the Old Testament, because Gary is teaching about the life of Christ in the class he's teaching. So the two fall together basically, because David is the king that gets the promise and a covenant that through his kingship will never end, and that Jesus will come through. And he didn't know who it was going to be, but it was Jesus was going to come through his lineage to be the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And anyway, so we're going to look at David. And do just a little bit of background as far as history is concerned and dates are concerned. I like to have a date that I can drive a peg down on and say, hey, this is a point in history that we need to remember, and because we can focus back to it or forward from it to things that take place in the New Testament and in the Old Testament. One of those dates is the date of Abraham, because he's the one that winds up with a covenant, isn't he? God says, I'm going to bless you, and I'm going to give you descendants that are so many that it's like the sand on the seashore, uncountable. And he lived in about the 1800 BC time frame. And when Jacob's family goes to Egypt and comes out of Egypt, and they went down there because they were starving, they were hungry. And so they go down, and Joseph is there, one of their brothers, and they go down there and come out. They wind up being slaves there. But when they come out of Egypt, going to Canaan's land, which is a promise to Abraham too, I'm going to give you a nation, and let him walk all the way through it 2 times. And when they come out of Egypt, it's estimated that there was somewhere between 2.5 and 4 million people when they went out of there. And out of Egypt going to Canaan's land, led by Moses. And that's a date I think we need to nail down, 1400 BC. They wind up coming to Canaan's land. Takes them 40 years to get there because they distrust and do not, and complain and everything. How long did it take them to have the golden calf? 2 months. How long did it take them to complain about no water? How long did it take them to complain about no meat? How long did that's all they did was complain. Well, before I throw a whole bunch of rocks, I don't think I'd want to be in Arabia either without any water. So I might have been one of those complainers. When they go into the promised land, Moses gets them to that, and then God takes him up on the mountain and buries him. Joshua takes over as the leader to take the children of Israel across the Jordan River and into the land of Canaan. And their instruction was to conquer all of the people there. And of course, we find several of them that nations or kingships in that area that they did not do what God said. They did not destroy them. And one of those people that they didn't destroy was the Philistines. And the Philistines lived on the west coast of what is Israel, or what was Canaan's land in those days. And basically it was from Joppa down to Gaza was the length of that country, or that kingship. And it was about 30 miles wide. We start looking at, and when you look at Israel today, how big is it? Not very big, is it? About 60 miles wide, and it's about 100 miles from north to south. It's not a very big place, but anyway, they are there in 1400 BC. They have a leader named Joshua that had Moses, and Moses talked directly with God, and so did Joshua. And they get into the promised land, and for 400 years, God is still their king. And I think that's important. God is rejected by the children of Israel of being their king. When they had a problem, they went to a judge, and the judge talks with God, or they went to a priest, and the priest talks to God, and get some instruction about what to do and where to go and how to handle it. And I can't imagine that with 4 million people that get in that predicament. But they finally wind up in about 1060, wanting a king, and like the other nations round about them. If you go to chapter 9 of 1 Samuel, in the second verse, it's talking about, well, I'll read first and second. It says, "Now there was a man of Benjamin, whose name was Kish, the son of Abiel, and the son of Zero, and the son of Koreth, and the son of Alphil, I have trouble with that, a Benjaminite, a mighty man of power. He had one son whose name was Saul, a choice young man and a goodly, and there was not among the children of Israel a goodlier person than he. From his shoulders and upward he was higher than any of the people. He was the tallest man in Benjamin. Who else comes from Benjamin, wears that same name? Saul of Tarsus, right? Tarsus was a Benjaminite. And anyway, it says he's a choice young man. He was good enough, better than probably the most of the rest of the folks, in that God selected him to be that first king. And he's a goodly man. And so he's anointed by Samuel in basically what we'd call privacy. He anoints him when he's there. Samuel's there. He anoints him, and there's nobody else but his family there. And he is anointed as the king. And so he's going to be the king. And the same thing happens to David. The same thing happens to him. He is anointed king, not in the presence of a whole bunch of people. Saul's kingship lasts from about 1040 to about 1020 BC. So he does two major things that cause him to lose the kingship. The first one is he came back and Samuel was supposed to meet him at Gilgal. And Samuel didn't show up for 7 days. And so Saul decides he'll do the offering himself. And he took the priest's position and offered a burnt offering to God, which was an abomination. He wasn't supposed to do it. So that gets him on the bad list to start with. And the next thing that happens that gets him on the outside or God through with him was he was told and instructed through Samuel to go and defeat Elimelech. Who is he? Well, he's the king of Elimelech is a guy named Agag. And they are the descendants of Esau, Jacob's brother, right? And when they come into Canaan's land, guess who won't let them pass through his country? There you go. So God told him to go annihilate them. Have you ever been in a situation like that? 1966, in roughly the September time frame, we had 2 American soldiers captured and taken into Cambodia. And our company was given the charge from the general to go get them back and to destroy the city that they were in. We didn't get them back, but we destroyed the city they were in. There wasn't nothing left. There was no animals, nothing left in that town in Cambodia. We did finally get them back about 2 months later. But anyway, that's what Saul's told to do. He's told to go completely annihilate the Elimelech. And he didn't do it. And we know the story. He brings back cattle. He brings back sheep and goats and cows and camels and all that stuff, and the king, Agag. And he runs into or Samuel looks him up, really. Runs into Samuel, and Samuel says, don't believe you did the job. This is paraphrasing. And he says, I did God's commandment. We destroyed that place. And he says, what am I hearing? Where'd them sheep come from? Where'd them camels come from? And who's this in robes? And he said, well, we brought back Agag to show our people he's by himself now. And the people wanted to make sacrifice. Samuel told him, you didn't do what God told you to do. And for that reason, you lose the kingship. So he's no longer going to be the king. But it takes a while, doesn't it? As we look through the history of it. I can't imagine living in that time frame. You ever just stop and wonder? And you know, if King David or King Solomon, let's take him. He was the richest one, right, in Israel. If King Solomon had the opportunity to swap his castle for anybody's home in this audience tonight, he'd do it. You know why? I bet you everybody in this room tonight's home is air conditioned, and all you got to do is punch a button. But everybody has hot water, running water in the house in several places. You know, if someone wanted to take a bath, somebody had to go draw the water and heat it. If he wanted to eat something, they had to go kill it and cook it. If he wanted to get cool, somebody had to come and fan him. You remember the story of David in his old age when he couldn't get warm? They went out and got a young woman, and she slept with him to keep him warm. He'd swap. Any of those folks in that time frame, given the opportunity to live where you live, would swap in a heartbeat. Shoes. You ever think about what kind of shoes they had? They basically had a piece of leather on the bottom and it tied onto their feet. And it was a leather sandal that didn't fit anybody. It wasn't comfortable at all. And so that's what we're looking at in that time frame. If you go from 1800 BC in Abraham's day, how far did he go? Abraham went from up in the north of Damascus and walked all the way through the land of Canaan to Egypt. And that's where Sarah gets Hagar, is in Egypt as a handmaid. And they come back and walk back up through Canaan's land. And he had started out in the Ur of the Chaldees. So he's made some long trips. He's made somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,500 just to get to Egypt. And he's walking in what we'd call, well, sandals. And that was all year long. Spirit was of God came on Saul in chapter 10, the 10th verse. It says, when they came thither to the hill, behold, the company of prophets met him, and the Spirit of God came upon him, and he prophesied among them. That's another thing that we find out about David. When David is anointed, God's Spirit comes on him. And it leaves Saul. And it says that an evil spirit came from God on to Saul. And there's a couple of ways to look at that evil spirit thing. It was a troublesome spirit because it kept him awake. He couldn't go to sleep. And it kept him agitated. And so one of his servants told him, says, I know a young man that plays the harp. And if you'll have him come play the harp, that'll get you well, or get you with a good attitude. And David winds up being the harp guy. And so he takes him into his household at that point in time for that particular reason. Verse 14 of chapter 16 says, "But the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord troubled him. And Saul's servant said unto him, Behold now, an evil spirit from God troubleth thee. Let our Lord now command thy servant, which are before thee, to seek out a man who is a cunning player of a harp. And it shall come to pass, when the evil spirit from God is upon thee, and he shall play with his hand, thou shalt be well." And so that's how David gets into the area, or into Saul's household. But the kingship is taken from Saul, and then we go through a whole bunch in 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel about how David winds up as the king. In 16:1 says, "The Lord said unto Samuel, How long will I mourn for Saul, seeing I have rejected him from reigning over Israel? Fill thy horn with oil and go, and I will send thee to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided me a king among his sons." Well, he has 7 sons besides David, so he has 8 sons. And Samuel goes to Jesse's house. Remember who Jesse is. You remember Ruth and Obed get married after Naomi and Ruth come out of Moab and go back to Jerusalem area of Israel. And she marries Obed because he is the second next of kin. And anyway, Jesse is the grandson of Ruth, and then he has 7 or 8. He has 8 kids, and so Samuel is sent down to Kish's or Jesse's area and to anoint the king. Verse 6, it said, "It came to pass when they were come that he looked on Eliab and said, Surely the Lord anointed is before him. But the Lord said unto Samuel, Look not on the countenance or on the height of his stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord seeth not as man seeth, for he looketh on the outward appearance, but the Lord looketh on the heart." Wow. That's a truth. God looks on the heart of people. And so I think we take a lesson from that. Where's my heart? And what am I doing? And who am I looking after? And who am I taking care of? And what do I see? And Jesse called Abinadab and made him pass before Samuel. And he said, Neither hath the Lord chosen this. Then Jesse made Shammah to pass by. And he said, Neither hath the Lord chosen this. Again, Jesse made 7 of his sons to pass before Samuel. And Samuel said unto Jesse, The Lord hath not chosen these. The Lord had a specific person in mind, and it was David. And he sent and brought him in. Now he was ruddy and with all of a beautiful countenance and goodly to look to. The Lord said, Arise, anoint him, for this is he. And then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brethren. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon David from that day forward. So Samuel rose up and went to Ramah. So the Spirit of the Lord came on him. And As we look through, and we'll look through his whole life before we finish this quarter. But when we look down the road at David and what he did, he wasn't allowed to build the temple because blood was on his hands. And he evidently kept that Spirit of the Lord all the time. And then we look back and say, well, what did Saul do that was, well, he disobeyed the command. Well, so did David. So we'll try to sort some of that out as we go through this quarter. We talked about the evil spirit that Saul that got at the same. I'm assuming at the time that David gets the Spirit of the Lord, Saul gets an evil spirit or a troublesome spirit the same day, same time. And so they work from that to get throughout the time. Chapter 17 is a very interesting one to me. Goliath. We all know the story of the giant, don't we? The Philistines or Philistines and Goliath have shown up pretty close to Jerusalem. They're not that far away. And they should have been destroyed when they first went into Canaan's land, and now we're down 360 years from the time they enter Canaan's land. And here are the Philistines still causing problems. And they've been plaguing them. And as I said, their land is about 30, 40 miles wide and from Joppa down to Gaza. And thank you. And they have been as far, and they go as far as Mount Gilboa. And that's pretty close to the Sea of Galilee. It's about 60 miles southwest of the Sea of Galilee. And that's where Saul is killed. He and his sons and his armor bearer are killed on Mount Gilboa. So the Philistines were all over the place, and they were causing problems all the time for the children of Israel. At this point in time, though, they are camped pretty close to Jerusalem, not that far, about 40 miles. And the Israelites are camped south of Jerusalem and overlooking the valley of Elah. And the Philistines on the mount on the south side of that, facing the children of Israel army. David has three brothers. The older brothers are, when the army went out to go after the Philistines, they left and went. And David's father, Jesse, tells him to get the food together and take it to the company that his brothers are in. And when he gets there, Goliath starts his big deal. I say starts it. David hears it for the first time. But he's been doing it for 40 days. He's been coming down off that mountain that's across the valley and daring them to send out their best. And evidently they had just started doing that in that time frame. If two armies met and were going to fight, then they'd take the best soldier they had and from each one, and whoever won between those two, that army was the winner. And maybe that'd be the best way to do that. I don't know. But I've never seen that happen. Verse 4 of chapter 17, and there went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistine named Goliath of Gath. whose height was 6 cubits and a span. He's 9 feet and 9 inches tall. About 2 of me. I'd be, what, 11 feet if I was doubled up. Anyway, that's a big, tall fella. And then he said he had a helmet of brass upon his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of brass. 166 pounds was what that coat of mail weighed. And he had greaves of brass upon his legs, and a target of brass between his shoulders. The staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron, 22 pounds. I don't know how much that weaver's beam, but you know, it'd be hard to, I couldn't throw an 8-foot 4x4, you know. And he's got a spear that's on a weaver's beam shaft, and the spear head weighs 20 pounds. If he didn't get it stuck in you, he'd knock you down with it, I guess. But anyway, that guy was a pretty hefty fella. When we look at our soldiers today, if you looked at the ones that were in Afghanistan, what they were carrying around on them, if they had their pack with them, the pack weighed somewhere around 60 pounds, and of course they had on jungle fatigues and combat boots and some other gear and a radio and, you know, a helmet with night vision goggles and a weapon, and I don't know how many rounds of ammunition they carried, but if I were them, I'd want at least 150 rounds. And anyway, they're not carrying 166 pounds extra. And these guys are in the desert too, or basically almost desert. David hears this guy bragging, and he doesn't like what he hears. Says, all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were sore afraid. And the men of Israel said, have ye seen this man that is come up? Surely to defy Israel he is come up. And it shall be that the man who killeth him, the king will enrich him with great riches, and will give him his daughter, and make his father's house free in Israel. David spake to the men that stood by him, saying, what shall he be done to the man that killeth this Philistine, and takes away the reproach from Israel? Or who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God? Notice he didn't say he defied Saul's army or our army. He said it's the army of the living God. And one way to look at the kingship was that God's still king, and Saul is anointed. He's his prince. And so he says he's defying the living God. And I get a little confused, and when we start reading through this, he's already been the harp guy, right? And so when he goes, somebody goes and tells Saul, look, we got this guy down here that thinks he can whip this guy. And Saul says, bring him to me. Well, I get a little confused at that point, because he don't know who he is even after he kills Goliath. Saul doesn't. Now, Saul either has dementia or I don't understand. Okay, if somebody help me sort that out, please do. How does he be the harp player when he's 17 years old to soothe the king in his own bedroom, and he don't know him when he shows up to, and he didn't have on an army outfit. He didn't have on a shield, and he didn't have on a coat of mail. He didn't have on he had a sling and a sack on the side. And he went down and picked up 5 stones out of the riverbed in the valley. And that's what he had to fight this man with. And Saul tells him, says, you're a young one. You can't do that. And David said unto Saul, thy servant kept his father's sheep, and there came a lion and a bear, and took a lamb out of the flock. And I went out after him, and smote him, and delivered it out of his mouth. And when he arose against me, I caught him by the beard, and I smote him and slew him. Thy servant slew both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them, seeing he hath defied the armies of the living God. You know, David there's a big difference between fear and faith, isn't there? You know, all the rest of the soldiers and his brothers are scared of the Philistine. David's not. He says, I kill bears and lions. This guy's no different. I can handle him because God is with me. Because God is with me. You know, you all know that I spent 23 and a half years on active duty in the military. And until I saw them over on the Czech border, you know, they had pumped the Russian up to be the 9-foot Goliath. And we used to have a little fun over there on the Czech border with them. They'd send their Hind Ds and some Mi-8s, helicopters. And the Hind D is a gunship. And it's 2 pilot and co-pilot in line like a aircraft cockpit. And it wouldn't hover. And so we'd catch them running the border and watching us, and we'd just start slowing back. And when we'd get to about 20 knots, that Hind D goes to the ground. You know, and he's game for anybody that wants to shoot him at that point. And this is sort of the way David sees Goliath, isn't it? He sees him as somebody that's making a big show and has more wind than he has true gall. And so David said, moreover, the Lord delivered me out of the paw of the lion and out of the paw of the bear. He will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine. Now, when you get down to they're talking to each other, the Philistine comes out there and brags about what he's going to do to him. He says, I'm going to kill you. And the bird's going to take you off, and the animals are going to come eat your carcass. What did David answer him back? He says, I serve the living God, and I'm going to behead you, and I'm going to feed you to the animals, and I'm going to take your head away. What did he do? He went off. Of course, Saul wanted to put him into armor and all that stuff, and he said, I don't know how to handle that stuff. Let me do what I do. He took his sling and 5 rocks. One rock hit that guy right between in the forehead. And it crushed his forehead. And he fell down. And David goes and takes the man's sword. Now, they don't give me I hadn't found a weight of that sword, but I would imagine it was a pretty good size one if a 9-foot guy's going to use it. And he cut the man's head off and took it with him. And he took it to Jerusalem and showed it and gave it to Saul. God was with him. Now, I don't think you can use a sling. And that's one of those, it's got 2 strings on a piece of leather, right? And you put your rock in the piece of leather and you swing it. And you turn loose of one of those strings. And he hit him in the forehead. God helped David because David depended on him and gave him credit and depended on him to help him in all his situations. And he did. said, the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. Hello? And that happened, David was appointed as armor bearer at one time for Saul. And I hadn't figured it out, folks. I'll just be truthful. I have not figured out why Saul wouldn't know David when he shows up to go kill Goliath. I'm having trouble with it myself. But fear and faith, the big difference, isn't there? I stop and think about it every now and then. That's the first one, isn't it? The AD 70. AD 70. What happened in AD 70? The Romans came and destroyed Jerusalem, didn't they? And they destroyed the temple. And on the way to Jerusalem, they went through towns, and when they run out of timber, they quit crucifying people. Wow. What would you do? Would you be, fear and faith are two biggies, okay? Two biggies. And after the Goliath thing, obviously David is going to be a commander for Saul for some time. But Jonathan and David become very good close friends. And David is kept from returning back home because Saul wants to keep him at the wherever he lives. And then Jonathan gives David all of the items that show that he is a prince. You see, Jonathan was going to be the next king after Saul, except God takes the kingship away from Saul, and David's going to be it. But verses 1 through 5 in 1 through 4 in chapter 18, it says, "And it came to pass when he had made the end of speaking unto Saul, that the soul of Jonathan was knit with the soul of David. And Jonathan loved him as his own soul. And Saul took him that day and would not let him go no more home to his father's house. Then Jonathan and David made a covenant because he loved him as his own soul. And Jonathan stripped himself of his robe that was upon him and gave it to David, and his garments, even to his sword and to his bow and to his girdle." Wow. The son that's going to be the next king turns over his identity as far as his clothing is concerned to David. He knows that David's going to be somebody. And all of Saul's sons are killed, and Saul is killed, and his armor bearer kills himself. Saul falls on his own sword after being wounded. And that happened in Mount Gilboa, which is pretty close to the Sea of Galilee. And of course, we know about two of those mountains up in that area, Mount Hermon and Mount Lebanon. Mount Hermon's 19,000 and some odd feet, and Mount Lebanon is 11,000 some feet. And from Jerusalem, you can see the snow-capped mountain of Mount Hermon all year long. Anyway, that's all I've got for tonight. Y'all look at 1 Samuel after the 18th chapter for next week. Thank you.